Hello everyone, my name is Munib Ali and I am an Ahmadi Muslim. Now, if I were to say those exact same words where my family is from, I would at best face 3 years of cruel imprisonment, or at worst, face death, or even the multi-generational suffering inflicted upon my family. Don't believe me? If only you could ask my uncle, Dr. Mubashir Sheikh. Now, my uncle, he was a nationally acclaimed pathologist who was murdered in cold blood just outside of his clinic on the way to work. I mean, think about it. On the way to save lives. Why? Because of that same title I introduced myself with, Ahmadi Muslim. And the reality is that millions of Ahmadi Muslims around the globe live in systemic, state-sanctioned persecution. Countless other relatives of mine have been killed. And so you can imagine why I've always had questions about what humanity even means given the state of such inhumane persecution. Or perhaps, more importantly for everyone here today, what does it mean to be human? After all, isn't being human our greatest common denominator? To try and rebrand the lost art of being human, I began a non-profit and a campaign called the Common Denominator. And to this day, while pondering that common denominator between us, it actually occurred to me that we live in a world of perpetuating paradoxes. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean by perpetuating paradoxes? I'll give you an example. Our understanding of mental health, of psychology, of psychiatry is at its very zenith. And yet, never has the world been more depressed, with clinical depression being the single greatest epidemic in the world by the World Health Organization in 2017. Our understanding of nutrition, diet, and exercise, it's the most advanced it's ever been. And yet, over 1.5 billion people are overweight or obese in the world, according to the World Health Organization. And our VO2 max, it's a measure of our aerobic capacity. It's a very important index of our health and our well-being. It pales in comparison to our ancestors. Or how about we claim to worry about the environment in developed nations, but these are the same nations that are dropping bombs on the other end of the globe. And it really makes me wonder, does anyone even understand the impact that has on the world, let alone the environment or the livelihood of millions of families and innocent children across the globe? These paradoxes, that I just mentioned, it's not so much in the bleeding edge advancements of 2021, but it's in the lack of humanity governing it. And when I say governing, I'm not talking about administrations or committees or boards. I am talking about that government within each of us. How you or I will use our human compass in a world overwhelmed by progress. It's talking about how the internet and technology has redefined the butterfly effect. You know, the butterfly effect, it used to mean that when a butterfly flaps its wings on one side of the world, it can cause a hurricane on the other. But my friends, we don't just live in a world of butterflies anymore, because we live in a world where the single push of a button can decimate civilizations many times over. So I want to propose a solution. And it's a solution that's been echoed by various philosophers over the ages, but it falls on deafened ears. And it's 3 simple principles where if we were all to implement them today, it could send a ripple for generations to come. Absolute justice, kindness, and kinship. Right, absolute justice, which essentially means to put everything in its proper place at the right time and according to the demands of the situation. It says that to give what is owed. So when a child is sick, we don't just give them piles of pills and antibiotics. We select and dose it according to the requirements of the situation, right? We have to use some type of prudence or wisdom in its administration. And this isn't a benign principle, trivial, of no consequence. I'll give you an example. I talked about antibiotics just now. A simple manifestation of the violation of the principle of justice in antibiotics, for example, is what we're now seeing in the form of antibiotic resistance. And we all know what these superbugs are capable of. You know, in 2014, Prime Minister David Cameron, he appointed a committee, a team, healthcare professionals, economists, and they estimated that this can cost us up to $100 trillion in the coming decades. Okay, next is kindness. And we all know to be kind to one another. But what I'm saying is to go beyond that, to give beyond what is expected or earned out of that human benevolence, to give without expecting anything in return, to pursue peace and actively avoid conflict. Because my dear friends, in today's trigger-happy age, individuals can not just destroy nations, but generations. And it's important to realize that this isn't an isolated principle. It's the next step. It's an extension to justice. You cannot have kindness unless it's predicated on justice. And I'll give you an example. It wouldn't be kindness to give a country that lacks clean drinking water access to higher bandwidth on their internet routers, while willfully ignoring the former needs. But that's exactly what's happening. Next is kinship. The feeling that what unites us biologically will always be more powerful than what unites us technologically. It's this burning love for the totality of humanity itself, irrespective of tribal, of racial or religious affiliations, among others. And therein lies that common denominator. You know, those paradoxes, again, that I mentioned, each one of those exist because we are giving our humanity the second slot of importance, right? And I'm actually going to demonstrate this with a short story here. We can walk through this together. So a man, he rushes into the emergency department with his son who suffered a blow to the head in football, and he's bleeding profusely. And by the time the surgeon arrives, because the team decided that he needed urgent surgery, by the time the surgeon arrives, the man is utterly furious, and he begins to bash the surgeon about how pomp and selfish the surgeon must have been to have taken this long to arrive. I mean, after all, his son's life is on the line. The surgeon, he earnestly apologizes and rushes in for surgery. And Lo and behold, a few hours later, he emerges with good news. Sir, your son is now stable, and we are hopeful for an excellent recovery. As the surgeon puts on his coat to leave again, the father, while relieved, he's still a little angry and mutters some other comments to the staff about the surgeon. And just after the surgeon leaves, a nurse comes up to the father, and her response is what I want you all to pay attention to. She says that, "Sir, the surgeon who just saved your son's life was not supposed to be in today. He was attending his own son's funeral when we had requested him to come in on call. He left that to save your son's life." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is kinship. Not even knowing another person's name, but in the name of being kith and kin in humanity, doing what gives life. So, as a medical student of today and a physician of tomorrow, I realize more than ever that climbing this incredible ladder of absolute justice, kindness, and kinship is more important than any knowledge in the world. After all, what saved that young man's life wasn't an extraordinary doctor. It was an extraordinary human. And we don't all need to be superhuman. We just need to be more human. Thank you, everyone.